Welcome to Making Sense. Jeff Snider and I are joined by a very special guest, Izabella Kaminska, who has accomplished many things, including being the editor of FT Alphaville, the Financial Times blog. Though to refer to Alphaville as a mere blog would be a gross disservice. No, ladies and gentlemen, it's much more than that. It's the modern day equivalent of the 17th century London coffeehouse. Both forums for transactions, spirited debate, the exchange of information, ideas, and lies, though Alphaville is there pointing them out for our benefit. Strangers, no matter what their social standing or political allegiance, are always welcome into lively, convivial company. The topics then, like now, the stock exchange, insurance, auctioneering, politics, arts, then the not-so-old masters, now NFTs. Both the contents of the 17th century coffee mug and Alphaville could be described the same way. Black as hell, strong as death, sweet as love, and shot through with grit. Izabella, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. That was possibly the best introduction I've ever had.
You deserve it. You deserve it, Izabella. We're fans of your work, a long time work, and Alphaville is a special place. It's unique on the internet and in financial journalism.
Yeah, I want to agree with that because, you know, we're very difficult on the financial media here. We're often very critical of what, you know, the media in general, but financial media in particular. And FT Alphaville is one of the oasis of truth in the media landscape because, in my opinion, the reason I read you and everybody else at Alphaville is because you're more interested, and it's very clear that you're more interested in getting things correct, getting at what's actually taking place in the complicated world of money and finance. And first of all, starting with the realization that this stuff isn't easy. There's a whole lot of complexity to it, which is completely 180 degrees opposite of what most people get from the impression they get from the financial media, which is, hey, a central bank does something or a government decides something and it's as easy as flipping a switch and everything happens the way it's supposed to. And FT Alphaville, I think you guys have branded yourself and positioned yourself to say, no, hold on a minute here. There's a lot more going on and you need to pay attention to it. And then doing a better job on top of it of relaying why you need to be paying attention to it, which is something I think, you know, Emil, you and I have talked about, we need to talk about more, is getting people to understand why they need to understand these nuances.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think Alphaville is definitely unique. And it's partly because of our format and our structure and the fact that we're a community-based product. So we can get away with like technical jargon that the main paper won't. And our readers tolerate us sort of also finding our way through the weeds. So often Alphaville stories are a collective process of like something happens that is really hard to understand in the market. And it's a bit of that, like, I mean, we call it now open source intelligence, right? The kind of Bellingcat model in journalism. But I think we were doing that before because we would get so much feedback from these high-level readers that we were attracting. And it was a two-way thing as much as just us. And so you can sort of write a piece where you expose things, but you can also sort of put something out there and be like, well, this is strange. Why is this happening? Then you get feedback. And it pushes you in a particular sort of way that you wouldn't normally. And I don't think you can do that in a sort of more strict format of like the Wall Street Journal or the main FT. Yeah, so that I think really helps. Of course, we don't always get it right. I don't want to like, you know, pretend we're geniuses. We definitely get a lot of typos because when you act, you know, when you're operating on this, like literally on your feet, then you do make mistakes and you do typos.
We were just talking about, I had a typo in an article I wrote a couple of weeks ago that made it into the headline. So it was oh no, it happens. I think people understand that it happens.
Well,
but again, I think
the trick is to own it, right?
Yes.
Because everybody makes mistakes, not to cover it up and just be like, just own it.
Exactly. We're not perfect and we're not infallible, but I think that's what we're really getting at here. It's the spirit of it, that we're trying to uncover truths that have been left covered for a very long time. And it's not an easy process. It's not something you can just say, oh, here it is.
And compared to the conventional media, because I used to work at Reuters, I also worked at CNBC, and, there are just the simplicity. They have kind of casual models of if this goes up, then that must go down, or this went up because, more buyers than sellers. This sort of very simplistic explanation of the market and causation is you always have to have a reason for a very explicit, easy reason that you can just put into a top line in a conventional news story. And sometimes you just can't do that in markets because you don't know, strange things happen, right?
Yeah, and I think it's one of my biggest complaints is that the media, and not just the media, but even the financial services industry in general, operates on shorthand. As you were just saying, we have these cut up models of what cause and effect is, and we always have to. It's almost like a script. If this happens, we have the answer for it over here, written, predetermined, and therefore that's what we're going to tell the audience because we don't expect the audience to know any better. That's really, I think, my biggest complaint is a lot of times, and it's true, new media as well as old media, a lot of places that it's difficult to get toward something useful and in terms of information and analysis if you don't think that your audience actually cares about it. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I think in modern information space, it's a really tricky balance because on one hand, especially for a newspaper like the FT, which is definitely a professional, it's geared at professional financial industry professional. But even so, there's so much information out there that you can be a specialist in a particular sector. So if we wade in with a very simplistic narrative, that's going to frustrate the specialists. But then again, if we don't pack it, if it gets too jargony, then the people who work in FX but not in high yield bonds, they won't get the context. They need a entry level explanation as well. So it's always about getting the balance right. And you kind of push away the experts at the cost of they're the cost to get the non-experts. But I think Alphaville, we try to service all these markets, so we can go really deep into the gritty detail to woo the specialists when we think that topic is worth going really native on. But at the same time, we can do entry-level stuff as well, because sometimes we're dipping into a market we have no idea about, and we're learning as we go.
Yeah, and I think, well, that's always the balance too, right? If you're trying to hit a mass media audience, you do have to, I hate to use the term dumb it down, but I mean, that's part, people who are not sophisticated investors are not going to read sophisticated articles on very complex topics, and that's certainly true. But I think, there's also especially the mission for any kind of media outlet, especially in terms of breaking new ground, new ideas. How do we represent people who have new ideas and have new kinds of ways of thinking about things? Whereas, that runs against what might be contrary to established editorial standards or editorial style guides or things like that. And it's always a difficult balance between this is what we're supposed to believe and this is kind of what we're actually seeing. And if those two things don't make perfect sense, how do we represent one for the other? And in a lot of places, it's just, we'll stick to the old way because that's the old way.
Right, exactly. I think that's why I see Alphaville as the skunk works of the FT, because we can experiment and we, even in the early days of crypto, no one was taking this seriously. And we were super critical of it, don't get me wrong, because I think that's also our job is to, I don't want to I have been a big Bitcoin critic for a while. My main criticism was simply that I saw it emulating a lot of the same processes that it was claiming to kind of resolve. Now, I've changed my opinion because, you know, whatever reasons. And but the point is, I don't think if you are coming to market like with crypto, if you're a sensible, logical person, then you would appreciate that constructive criticism is good for you, because if you can defy it, then it makes you stronger, right? So people should welcome that sort of constructive scrutiny. The problem is when I think media takes a sort of preferential view to like massively scrutinize this but not scrutinize that, you know?
Yeah.
We scrutinize everything. That's my point. Like, people say I hate on crypto, but I just hate on everything. It's very simple.
That's, you know, I think that's it, because there, you can tell there are certain areas or certain topics where especially the quote unquote old media might be more of a cheerleader rather than a skeptic. And I think that's absolutely right. And that's what the thing I love about Alphaville is that you guys are skeptical about everything. And you should be. It should be, we're getting at what we believe is the correct way of understanding the world, and from a place of infallibility, ourselves recognize our own weaknesses and strengths and things like that. And you have to be skeptical of everything, but in the it's uniform across many media spaces where, in particular, Federal Reserve or a central bank, they're just given complete and utter deference on every possible topic. And you can see it in, you know, Jay Powell will have a press conference and he'll get nothing but softball questions. And you want somebody up there to say, hey, Jay, you've said inflation for over a decade, or the Federal Reserve and the ECB, Christine Lagarde, whoever it is, you guys have been saying inflation for over a decade. Where is it? Somebody should ask them.
I want to officially say that we, Alphaville, were the first media to ask the ECB, I think it was Mario Draghi at the time, a question about negative interest rates. That was our question from Lisa Pollock. We were the first to ever ask that, and that was ages ago, but
Right.
like before people even thought that was possible. And at the time, I remember, because Lisa was in the audience, she was like, I'm going to get a question. Can you send me what to write? So what to ask? I said, oh, ask about negative interest rates. She went, what, really? Because even Lisa was a little bit like, come on, that's a bit wacky. And she said the question, and there was like silence, because people were like, she's joking. That's such an absurd question.
How dare you?
Yeah. And then, like, Draghi, you could tell that now, like, if I look at the video again, I can see that he knows there's an issue here. She doesn't know, because I fed her the question, but he knows that how he answers will have like historical implications. He says something very tenuous and non-committal as usual.
They filibuster. That's what they do. They filibuster. They say nonsense and say nothing.
But if if I'd been another journalist, I would have followed up on that, but nobody did, because at the time everyone thought it was pointless. And now here we are, many years later, negative rates are just a norm.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it. And there's no reason there's no justification for it, at least not a legitimate one. And certainly in my mind, because, you know, whatever was the original purpose of negative rates, just like quantitative easing or anything else, those have all fallen by the wayside because they've been disproven thoroughly time and time again. And so you have to, you know, we want the media to be skeptical and scrutinize all of these programs as they continue to repeat year after year after year. Somebody just to say, hey, what are you really doing here? It's not enough for you to say we're being accommodative.
Completely. I totally agree. But it's interesting to hear that, you know, people, investing professionals do see that.
Oh,
Izabella,
yeah. I mean, go ahead, Emil.
Izabella, here in the United States, there's a survey company, Gallup, of course, and they have been asking American citizens for decades now what their opinion is, what their confidence is in institutions, both public and private. And so they'll ask them every year, how much confidence do you have in the presidency, the Supreme Court, Congress, what else? Big labor, organized religion, the media, the army, the police, and so forth and so forth. And generally, everyone is losing confidence in these institutions. But the media, newspapers as a category, newspapers hold special place, at least here in America, as having some of the least amount of confidence held by the population at large. In fact, consistently, only Congress rates lower. And as you know, we recently tried to burn down Congress. So it's not like that's very impressive. So the media is only just above Congress in lack of confidence in the United States. Is that true in Europe, in Britain as well? And why do you think that is? What we're complaining about the media right now. What's missing from journalism? You're on the inside. Why have we lost that confidence?
So I think mainly because we in the sort of, we elites in the liberal media have been, we've gone on the defensive because people accused us of being fake news. And rather than actually listen and think, oh, maybe there's some truth here, maybe there has been some unfair reportage. And I actually think the unfair reportage is a function of structural issues more so than, like, say, any kind of like malicious conspiracy. That's not the case in my experience at all. But there is legitimate concern with how the media has evolved in the digital age, and there are these positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops associated with clicks and how journalists operate and fund themselves. And all of this is made for I think, a very fragile system which needs real scrutiny, because there is no real, well, there is real journalism, but very often the good journalism, even if it's out there, it doesn't get to the, into anybody's brain because people don't see it. So there's like a small amount of people getting really good quality journalism, but it's not necessarily the stuff that gets the clicks. And that is a fundamental problem that is to do with the internet structure. And I think, on the inside, I would say there has been post-2016, in the UK, we had Brexit, you guys had Trump. These were very polarizing issues. And my old editor, Lionel Barber, recently wrote a sort of reflective piece about how, the FT itself may have abandoned its commitment to two-sided journalism, as in properly balanced journalism during this period. And he has some thoughts about why that happened. And actually he name checks Alphaville as one of the, one of the good things that the FT had going for it in terms of keeping the balance right, and how he sees Alphaville and structures like Alphaville as perhaps bringing a bit more balance back into the news. I mean, he claims it was justifiable, but it's now time to get balance back on the table and to rebuild that trust. And I totally agree. And I'm glad he's being honest about it, because I think one of the problems is that a lot of the media space is still in denial about it. And my issue more bluntly is, again, like we talked earlier, it's not so much that one side was particularly, that we, the media, were particularly hard on Brexiteers or Trump supporters, is that we were not equally hard on the opposition. So it's more about who we were soft on, because everyone deserves scrutiny in the public profile. It's not like, Trump complaining about having bad media. That's silly, in my opinion. If you're in that position, that's what happens. I mean, the issue is that we did not distribute the criticism fairly across the board, is what I would say.
Is that because of preconceived notions or preconceptions about, we accept what the Remain side says, and we're more scrutinizing the Brexit side because people in the media tend to not, is it really a function of balance, or is it maybe, as we said before, the mission? The media kind of lost this mission as a truth seeker.
I have a grandiose thesis about what's happening. I don't know how linked it is to media, but I don't know if you're a fan of Adam Curtis, but he has a new 6-part documentary called "Can't Get You Out of My Head," and I don't want to tell you my thesis without mentioning that because it's highly influenced by his work. But I think what's happened is his analysis is very good, which is that we, the liberals, got complacent. We won the war. First of all, we won World War II. Then there was just, this duality with the Cold War. It was us versus them. Then we won the Cold War, and we were happy. Our system had prevailed, and we we stopped being on guard. We withdrew in the sense that we just focused on the good stuff. So we became consumer mad. You know, everything was great. We told our own stories. We were just, you know, the media became more and more fragmented, and that was fine because in a liberal society, collectivism isn't number one priority. What the priority is telling your own stories and being happy. But as a result of that, we, in the kind of privileged position of the leading ranks, when I say we, I don't feel like a leader, but I mean representatively in the media.
No, you're selling yourself short here. I think, you know, especially we're going to heap praise on Alphaville, and the reason we brought you on here is because we think of you as a leader, and we think of Alphaville as one of the good media sources out there. So don't sell yourself short, Izabella.
That's too kind. Just don't call me a young global leader, because
okay.
But anyway, that's a joke about web. But anyway, so I think we withdrew, and we abandoned our responsibility to keep an eye on whether the system was working for everybody. And as a result, you know, that's how the working class sort of demographic, and this happened in Poland. Like, I was speaking to my dad not long ago, and this is exactly what happened in Poland in the 80s, is that it wasn't, communism didn't collapse because like the bourgeois like rose up and fought off the communists. It collapsed because the working classes felt abandoned by the Polish elite, who were in sort of middle class bureaucratic jobs in urban centers, totally corrupt, and had forgotten that like communism was supposed to work for working class people. And so actually, you know, as is famously told, the revolution came from the shipyards, from like Wałęsa. That was a working class rebellion against the communist system. Like, no, people forget that, right?
Yeah.
So the similarity is there, and I think we abandoned our responsibility to the working classes and assumed that they would be like, well, yes, well, clearly the Gini coefficient, whatever, it shows that my life is getting better, but it's not. And in that process, some other forces came in and decided to stir up the old power play that we had thought had gone away. And so this is Adam Curtis's analysis, that actually the old forces that were out there before have not gone away. They just saw a massive vacuum and stepped in and started like trying to pull this, you know, this demographic that has no leadership in opposing forces on the fringes. And now really they're coming for the middle class liberals, except the liberals don't realize, in my opinion, and maybe, you know, I'll be open, you know, people can disagree with me, but they don't realize that liberalism is not on the table. There is no real liberal option. They're selling it in the UK. The conservatives are not, you know, the conservatives are both not conservative and they're not liberal. I don't know what they're. There's just been massive elite capture across the world, and neither side, no political proposition is actually servicing the classical liberal perspective. That's my view.
No, it's something that dovetails in what we've been talking about since we started this podcast, and what I've been writing about for years, which is that we've undergone an economic transformation. First of all, it was globalization, which was not very well understood. Yes, there were benefits, and a lot of places around the world were transformed into these miracle economies of modern industrial wonder, and that was true. There was benefits to it. But then something happened, it sort of kind of went away, and as Emil and I, we talk about this all the time. We live in a non-linear world, and the implications of that is we understand that, yes, things might be getting better, but if things are not getting better at the same rate they were, we notice that. Whether we're consciously or not, we understand that something has changed. And yes, society is advancing, but it's not advancing maybe in the same rate or the same ways it was before. And that's cause for enormous problem, especially when we don't have any type of answer for it. And in the post-crisis era, the post-2008 era, the answer has always been, oh, quantitative easing or negative interest rates or something like that. That's supposed to solve all these problems, or at least alleviate some of the issues, and it never does. And it's only hardened people, or at least forced a lot of people, and getting back to the context of the media here, without being able to find answer in the media, at least, because the media is not even being scrutinizing these mainstream positions. I think that's what's led to a lot of the new media and a lot of the garbage that's out there, where people are just selling their own version of reality because they can, right? Nobody has any answers. Something has happened. We don't know what it is. So let's look to somebody who at least is trying to find some answers for it.
I think that is exactly right. And of course, it doesn't help that post 2008, nobody has really articulated the key factors that have that drove 2008 into being. I mean, yes, we've had masses of post, GFC regulation, and it's all happening. I mean, the powers that be know, I think, quite clearly what happened, but nobody really articulates that to the common man, which is, there's this perception that it was the hedge funds, or it was the I don't know, the subprimes, as to quote Wall Street, Michael Douglas's performance there. We did find that funny. There's all sorts of shadow banking, blah blah blah. I mean, but really nobody has done a proper analysis of what is our favorite subject, which is the role of the eurodollar in that whole collapse. And as a result, we've got, I think, a failure to understand how we may be not solving the problem today, but actually exasperating all the forces that never really went away.
Yeah, making it worse, right? I mean, as long as people are people. People are going to look for answers because they realize something's wrong. Whether they know what it is or not, they can tell. And I'm not getting answers from anybody. I'm not even getting the right questions. I think that, getting back to the media, the media is not even asking the right questions on behalf of, as you were saying, working class people, because it's the working class people who, first of all, said we had to bear the brunt of the transformation of globalization to begin with, especially in America. We have these places called the Rust Belt, which were all these manufacturing jobs that just disappeared. And you can make the argument that was necessary economic adjustment, whether it was or not. I mean, there's certainly a case to be made for it. But then, if you're supposed to go from a middle class industrial job working in a steel mill to a computer programmer because of the new economy, except there is no computer programming job for you to transition to, now you're really mad because you lost your old job and there's no new job to transition to, and you have no idea what happened in the first place. And you're right. Everybody says, oh, subprime mortgages. And it just, that never made full. Even back in 2008 when everything was happening, people could tell subprime mortgages were not the reason that, AIG was being bailed out by the Federal Reserve. There was something else going on there, which then fed into all these conspiracy theories about, oh, the Fed is doing this on purpose. The elites are, engineering a transfer. All this other stuff that has been so completely unhelpful because it further, anybody who holds a skeptical position, you're immediately lumped into with the conspiracy theorist because you're outside the mainstream. And I think that's one reason why the media, the mainstream media in particular, has had such a difficult position, is because you have to navigate that landmine, right? You don't want to be lumped in with a conspiracy theorist either, but yet you want to maintain some kind of
absolutely. One of the problems, I did a video on QAnon, and I think one of the problems is very much that there are enough little bits of truth in these conspiracy theories that are really, really, that deserve further investigation. But they kind of, they operate in this, everyone's at home, we've got access to more information than ever before. And most people don't have the privilege of being able to call up someone and say, I represent the FT, and do the verification work. So there's two types of intelligence here. There's the open source intelligence that you can just get yourself from the internet. And then there's human intelligence, which is what journalists do when we call up and we meet people and we kind of try and get a feel for whether the people are lying to us or whether they're, trying to, deflect or whatever. And it's the combination of these two types of research methods that you should ideally create a good story. If you just overly focus on one but not the other, bad things happen. If you only do human intelligence, where you just become a PR just captures you because you just become a loudspeaker for what people are telling you, right? You have to inform yourself before you ask these people questions. But vice versa, if you only do open source intelligence, then you don't have the corrective mechanism to kind of, tell you, well, okay, no, that's insane. That's just not good. There is a truth here. You've just extrapolated it and gone crazy, right?
Yeah.
And you need that reining in. And certainly, I think what has happened with conspiracies is that the presence of them actually, you're absolutely right. It makes journalists, because they are like serious people who can't possibly be associated with conspiracies, it makes them anxious and hesitant to investigate things that have a conspiracy sort of genre to them.
Yeah, and I think over the last 10, 13 years, whatever it's been, it's almost everything nowadays. If you stray even a little bit off of the mainstream line, you're painted with that kind of well, what are they talking? I mean, you're going into an area you shouldn't be going into, and I think it really has ring fenced a lot of media commentary into just what appears to be cheerleading the mainstream line, at least in my opinion. Yeah, there's not enough. There's sort of a fear of going too far astray, otherwise you lose all credibility in sort of the echo chamber.
Absolutely, and it's almost like the equivalent I would make is like the Catholic Church. You couldn't question, like, there were heresies. If you like dared to like say this or that, you'd be like Galileo or whatever. Here comes somebody with a different perspective. No, it doesn't fit our doctrine, therefore out. And actually that turned out to be really bad. So no, I quite agree, and I don't know how we make that better, other than I mean, a good example of like what's happening in media is that clearly we have a funding issue. Clearly we have an issue with journalists not being able to kind of speak out if they think people going into groupthink. There is this sort of associated culture war situation that is creating a sort of bounty market for journalists to say the wrong thing, because like if you say the wrong thing and you're captured by a bounty hunter, you're then named and shamed, and they get their payback in scandal.
Yeah, you're excommunicated from the group, right? You've lost all your reputation, which as a journalist is everything. Reputation is all you have. So
then meanwhile, you've had all the scandals at the New York Times, and you've had the very high profile resignations of people who claim there's been like an outbreak of groupthink, and these internal lobbying groups, which I think are another reflection of what's going on and going wrong with with journalism, which is just the power has transferred to different like there's old guard and new guard principles in the media, and old guard is very kind of liberal minded. Everyone gets, you don't have to agree with the all perspectives, but you have to air them and you have to confront them and you have to challenge them. And then there's the other perspective, which is no, you can't give these people a platform at all. And I have always, and like this is even before culture wars broke out, I've always argued that you don't get rid of bad ideas by like pushing them under the carpet. You have to challenge them, and you have to appeal to people's logic, and you have to make a better case, right? That is how you quash these things. By if canceling people was going to like make any difference, then everything should have finished when Alex Jones got thrown off Twitter, right? And
no, you're right, because when you're pushing things off to the side, you end up giving them new life, breathing new life into them, and making them potentially bigger than they would have been otherwise.
And all this has happened before. I mean, again, the Catholic Church, if you look to the sort of massive kind of schism surrounding the Council of Nicaea, and like whether or not, the Trinity should be perceived as this or that, that caused like, World War II in terms of schisms, and you had excommunication of the heretics who didn't believe that. I can't remember. I'm not a good Catholic, so I can't remember which one identified.
It's such a nuanced point, though, that now when we look back on it, it's hard to believe that there was this incredible schism.
Well, but I can, like, in the modern kind of, we're having these sorts of like exactly the same sort of fallouts over very niche. Very in 50 years time, people were really going nuts about like what bathroom you should be using or whatever is the current rage, debate in town. But it's strange, and it's happened before, is what I mean. We go through these cycles, right? So
yeah, I liken it to the introduction of the Gutenberg Bible. Because once the mechanical typeface and printing press showed up, and then it allowed a structural change in the exchange of information, it completely rewrote the old way of doing things, because now, you know, information flowed through very narrow channels that were tightly controlled. And we're doing something similar today with the internet. The internet has broken down a lot of barriers, except we don't really know who to trust. We haven't formed new structures that tell us what is not good or bad information, but I almost think it's about, we don't know how to evaluate evidence anymore, because there's tons of evidence out there. It's just that in complex topic, like let's get back to the financial world and the dollar world, what FT Alphaville does, and what I love about FT Alphaville is that you guys actually examine evidence, and you do so in a very scientific and objective manner, which is, I think that's the part that's missing from much of the media, is we don't know how to break down complex topics and understand and interpret the evidence that we're seeing. And so we just fall back on our old standards and just say, well, you know, we don't really know anything about negative interest rates, so we'll just take Christine Lagarde's word, or, you know, Mario Draghi's word for it. And I think there's, you know, how do you solve that problem? Because there's got to be a balance or a marriage there between open source media that does know how to do some evidence, but doesn't get some of the other things right about journalism, where journalism, you know, there's got to be some way to put the two together, that we can have evidence and objective investigation and scrutiny.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the problems, and I've thought about this, and I've identified it as maybe, I mean, Alphaville is cynical, and we joke about, and like as a result, we can be super cynical and skeptical of everything, right? But there are loads of people I encounter who are like, why are you being so harsh on this? Why, you know, or I get emails like, you know, asking me, you know, why am I not promoting this, or why don't we ever do any positive stories? And I was like, well, because that's not what we do. Like, you can get that from everybody else. Like, if you want the case for Bitcoin, it's out there. Like, I don't need to. I try to, if the core media is going this way, I try to, like, always, I'm a contrarian. I think it's important to, so actually in the sense of, like, we're highly skeptical. If I feel the needle is going the other way, because sometimes in a post sort of crisis situation, everyone gets too negative. Well, then you have to make the opposite case. So it's really not even about being hyper skeptical. It's just about offering the perspective that isn't the main one. But what I think in particular is the problem in journalism is that the journalistic process is skewed towards confirmation bias because of how it works mechanically. So you get a story idea. So first of all, you have a hunch that is based, like in science, like you have a theory, a hypothesis. I think maybe this is like happening in this particular, I'll do an investigation, or this is my theory about what's happening. Then you do some preliminary research to make sure you're not mad. And then usually, because you don't want to go to the target of your investigation in case they like throw you off course or feed you a line, you tend to immediately then go to sources who confirm your perspective. So you've created, so in that sense, you're going quite QAnon, because you are research on a hunch, then go to confirmation sources. And only at the end of the process, once you've done all that, do you reach out to the other perspective to balance things. And you have to balance, you absolutely do. But because it comes at the end of it, so you've done your pro and then your anti, sometimes you're so invested in that story, by the time you get to the end, when you're doing, then if there's a rational explanation as to why your hunch was wrong, you're going to be closed off to it, not because you're malicious or even doing it consciously, but because you have invested in this story and you don't want your work to go to nothing.
That's what. That's what so impressed me about Stephen Goldfeld's paper, and that was in the 1970s. It was the case of the missing money that Jeff often speaks of on this show, and it reads so unlike the economic working papers that we read today. He didn't know what was happening. He wrote up a paper, and at the end he said, I don't know. I don't know where the money is. But he was okay with that. Yeah. He was pursuing knowledge, and hey, this is as far as I got. I'm submitting it, and maybe you all can help me. But you don't see that in today's work. If you don't come to a conclusion, pro or against, well, then it doesn't count.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is, I think we need to be, and I think that's why Alphaville works, because very often we do just nosedive into something and go, hey, this is really interesting, and come back, you know, and our conclusion is a bit like ambiguous about, well, you know, it could mean this, but it could mean that, hey. But the exercise is just to draw attention to this new interesting development that's happening over here. And, you know, maybe there's something in it, maybe there's not, but we don't learn about it unless we look into it, right?
Yeah, but you're treating your audience with honest. You're like, you're saying, look, we don't have an opinion to give you. Here's something you should pay attention to. Think about it for yourself and come to your own conclusion. I think that's really part of what's missing in terms of evaluating evidence. Sometimes it's here's the evidence, here's the story, here's something that's going on. We're not going to tell you what it means because we're not really sure either. You can decide for yourself whether it's, you know, how important it is and what it actually means. I think there's tremendous value in doing just that kind of a service.
Yes, and I think the other problem is also this, like, there is in certain quarters, if you're not in like a contrarian mindset or your publication isn't known for that, there is this sort of pressure to just like go on the bandwagon and repeat things. So there's this sort of amplification of like somebody has a particular take and then it just amplifies like amazingly through like Twitter, whatever, social media. And it's by that point, it's kind of reminds me of, is it Hitler or one of those guys? Who's like, doesn't matter if it's you know, as long as you say the lie enough times, you start to begin to believe it, right?
The big lie, yeah.
It's not even the big lie, because the big lie is like, oh, I'm gonna send rockets to Mars by next week, right? Whatever. I'm not saying somebody's doing that. No one's, yeah, didn't have anyone in mind about that. But it's more that it's more of a kind of repetition. It's like gaslighting. It's like this, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think people are doing it consciously. They're just repeating it. But because you hear the same thing from all these quarters, you just assume it to be true. Like global financial crisis was caused by subprime mortgage. You just hear it, blah, 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 all the time. Well, then it must be true. And you don't actually then bother to see if maybe it wasn't true or it was, you know, perhaps decontextualized. I mean, I made a huge mistake last week. I'm really conscious of this, but I made a really big mistake last week because I got triggered by a story. So here in the UK, we've had a really horrific situation where a young woman got murdered, and everyone's panicking about it. And the police had suggested that women stay at home until the culprit was found. And there was a discussion in the House of Lords about it, and a baroness called Baroness Jones so it was a clip of her sort of saying, well, I think a much better policy would be if we had a male curfew from 6 p.m. so no males out on the streets until 6 p.m. And she said it so reasonably and so articulately. It seemed very sincere, and so I fell for that. And I'm like the person preaching to everybody. You have to see the full clip, right?
Right.
But it seems so, like that particular clip seems so, you know, what's it called? Like, it didn't seem like it had any extra bits to it. And of course I went a bit nuts on Twitter about it because I thought it was an absurd idea. And then I found out that actually she was just using one absurdity to highlight a different absurdity. So she didn't actually mean it, but no one has seen the full clip, and it doesn't matter because all of like the British media have like gone nuts about it. And as far as like, if you ask you know, Joe Bloggs down the street, they think that some woman has in the House of Lords has seriously proposed that we do a man curfew from 6 p.m. And it doesn't matter that it's not true. It's become part of the myth, like the public mythos. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's, again, get back to the internet technology that's broken down the barriers of information, that it doesn't get filtered into, you know, it doesn't go through editorial processes. It doesn't go through, you know, expert opinions. It doesn't go through those kinds of channels that say true or false. I mean, this did happen, but it didn't happen the way you think it does. And there's good and bad. I mean, there's tremendous positives about this free flow of information across any kind of boundary that now doesn't exist. And there's always dark sides to it too. And that's, I think, you know, how long did you know, when the printing press first showed up, I mean, how long did it take before we settled into sort of a new information equilibrium? I think it was quite a prolonged period of upset. So, This, as you said before, this kind of thing, it's not necessarily cyclical, but it repeats. New technologies breed new break down barriers and reorient society.
And the other like analogy is what we had in the UK was the penny press. I think you guys had something similar, where because of the printing press, the cost of creating pamphlets went to nothing, and so like the internet today, there was just endless amounts of like rubbish circulating, gossip, libelous, it was nuts, and the noise to signal was like on a ridiculous ratio favoring noise. And it was out of that climate that the FT was born, or financial news as it was back then, because people realized that actually it pays to pay a professional to sift through all this stuff. But at the moment, no one has clocked this. So we moan about democracy being hijacked by the Russians or whatever, but the obvious solution is paying for your media. If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. You get what you pay for.
Izabella, what about some of the outfits like Axios and for sports journalism, The Athletic, where you do pay to get information? Are we moving towards something what you just described? And maybe in a couple of generations, we'll look back and see the rebirth of a new sort of journalism we can count on.
Yes, I think that's still going to be a very hard sell to the average man on the street because they become so accustomed to not paying for news. But it's better than the alternative, which I just read about this week, is that like the Guardian is increasingly going to go to a world where journalists are paid on the basis of their clicks, which is a horrific feedback loop, because the information that sells isn't necessarily the information that people need. So I think
in any way worthwhile. That's part of the editorial process, is not just saying this information is valid, but it is curating information to prioritize. This is the important stuff. This is the trivial stuff, and all that kind of. There's a massive function that the journalism in general is supposed to perform for society, and right now. I have tremendous sympathy for your job, because it's really difficult to navigate all of these kinds of issues and try to get it right.
And it's a market problem, isn't it? Because how do you are always going to end up in a situation where if journalists get paid for populism, popular posts, you're not going to get high quality stuff, because unfortunately most people have no bandwidth.
Right.
Izabella, Jeff, if you don't mind, if I could transition. I can't think of a segue. If I was a professional, I could think of one. You mentioned the word market, Izabella. So speaking of market,